Thank you very much. Good. So a very warm welcome to another Insiders Outsiders event. For those of you, and I do notice quite a few unfamiliar names in the list of attendees who don't know about the project, you'll forgive me if I just say a few words by way of introduction about it. It's a project that I myself initiated way back. Gosh, it was actually in late 2017, I realized with some dismay and surprise. And it took the form initially of a nationwide year-long arts festival, a slightly kind of maverick kind of festival, but dedicated to both celebrating but also sort of examining in a more nuanced and detailed and indeed quite critical way the very pervasive and extraordinary contribution to British culture made by those who found refuge here from Nazi-dominated Europe. And, well, after a year, as it happens, COVID, we all know COVID, kicked in with a vengeance, but luckily for us, it didn't curtail the festival as such. And like everybody else, pretty much, the obvious thing was to go online. And as some of you will indeed know, I've noticed Marjorie Downward, for example, in the audience, a loyal follower, somebody I've had very interesting conversations with. We initiated an ongoing program of online events, of which this, of course, is part, which continues to amaze me in terms of the kind of rich material that keeps being brought to my attention, surfacing. And I have to say, this event is very much a case in point. I can't actually remember now. It was a good few months ago that somebody alerted me to Christoph's fascinating new book, or rather newly translated book. We'll hear more about that later, about Ilse Gross, who became Kathrine Talbot. And I think, Sue, you also admitted you hadn't actually heard of her, had you? How extraordinary is that? And what an extraordinary story it is. So it's with very great pleasure that I will now introduce our two participants, starting with Christoph himself, the author of the book under discussion. He's a professor of American Studies at the University of Paderborn in Germany. His English is impeccable, accented somewhat American style, but he's explained by the fact that he's taught not only in German-speaking countries in Germany, but also in Basel, Bonn, Bochum, as well as Paderborn, but also worked quite extensively in America. He was a Humboldt Fellow at MIT and Boston University, and also a Fulbright Scholar at the Cooper Union in New York. He's written a number of also sort of really intriguing books. I don't know if we'll have a chance perhaps to discuss at least one of them tonight. One's called Flickering Light, A History of Neon. Another one, In the Restaurant, Society in 4 Courses. And the one that might be particularly pertinent to touch on tonight, Breathing in Manhattan, Carolo Speeds, the German Jewish gymnastics instructor who brought mindfulness to America. And he's currently based in Berlin. And just very briefly to introduce his interlocutor, the person he's going to be in conversation with, leading the conversation is Professor Sue Weiss in the School of English, part-time these days, University of Sheffield, who for many years has had a long-standing interest in Holocaust representation, teaching it at both undergraduate and graduate level, as well as being the author of a significant number of books on Holocaust literature and film, including Holocaust fiction, Children Writing the Holocaust, a book on Claude Lanzmann's Shoah, and together with Jenny Adams, a book called Representing Perpetrators in Holocaust Literature and Film, and another one also very important, I think, Textual Deceptions, on the topic of false memoirs and literary hoaxes, of which, yes, we might hear more. Very good. So over to you. I'm going to now make myself invisible and hand over with great pleasure and anticipation to Sue. Okay, and you all know the ropes. Just briefly, you know, is it Danielle? If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, just for the moment. The event is being recorded. There will be, of course, a chance to ask questions and comment later. You could start putting comments and questions in the chat whenever you feel the urge, but equally it's a fairly small and hopefully select gathering, so we could perhaps, you know, ask people to contribute verbally as well. Good. Over to you, Sue.
Thanks, Monica, and I'm really honoured to be here. I met or encountered Christoph, because we haven't met in reality, through my colleague, Jonathan Ellis, who's an Elizabeth Bishop specialist. And I think Christoph is going to explain how he came to this topic. But the minute that I read a little bit of Christoph's biography, which is here, I just felt entranced by it. It's written in quite an unusual way for a biography, in a literary manner, which I think Christoph would explain. So it's always excellent to hear about a forgotten writer who was once well known, and the details of Ilse Gross's personal history and her writings make this discovery, which Christoph has brought to us, even more remarkable. She arrived in Britain as a German Jewish refugee, but became a major literary stylist in English, writing about subjects mostly other completely than her own life, and the author of 3 novels, as well as poetry, under the name of Kathrine Talbot. She also became part of a celebrated artistic family. Her husband was the painter Kit Barker, brother of the poet George Barker. She was a loyal friend to the American poet Elizabeth Bishop and admired by Anne Stevenson. So my first question to Christoph is, could you tell us something more about Ilse Gross's history, and how did you make this discovery or rediscovery about her?
Thank you. Thank you, Sue, and thank you, Monica. Thanks for having me. It's a real honor. I wish I had a really fascinating tale about how I discovered Kathrine Talbot or Ilse Gross. It's a really dry academic anecdote. I discovered her, well, part of my day job is teaching poetry to students, and I read an article about Elizabeth Bishop, and somewhere in a footnote, it said that one of Elizabeth Bishop's pen pals was a German woman named Ilse. And I was really curious because, to be absolutely honest, my mom's name is also Ilse. So I was like, well, it can't be my mom, right? So I looked up Ilse Gross, who's from Bingen on the Rhine, Germany. I got in touch with a wonderful lady who's running an association in Bingen that's commemorating the Jewish life of Bingen on the Rhine, which had a really vibrant Jewish community before the Nazi era. And so found Ilse Gross and found out that she wasn't just Elizabeth Bishop's pen pal, but that she was a novelist in her own right, Kathrine Talbot. And that was just an amazing discovery, I thought. And well, yeah, that's how it all began.
I've written down a sentence that you use about Ilse's life, that it began with breakdown, then escape, then internment and grief. And I wondered if you could just give a little outline of what her background was and then what became of her.
Sure. I mean, it's a Holocaust story, and she lost both of her parents and her sister in the Holocaust. So there's, she got out of Germany when she was 14, attended schools in Switzerland. For financial reasons, at some point that didn't work out anymore, came to the UK on a forged visa. So she wasn't part of the Kindertransport. It was really a kind of a fake visa. Worked as a maid, got deported to the Isle of Man. So really traumatizing story, like the early years of her life. There's also obviously a different chapter, and that's that she married twice, and this second husband was the better choice, and as Monica noted, was part of an artistic community in the UK. So that's roughly the big picture of her personal life.
Thank you. And I said that the book that you've written, to hold it up again, is it extremely readable. I think I would call it a creative biography, but it gives a real sense in the background of all the work that you must have done. It feels like a real labor of love. And I wonder if you could say a bit about the kind of the path where did it take you with your research? What sources did you use?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to be also kind of a social history of Jewish refugees in the UK. So not just to talk about Ilse as just one person, but to show just how different she was, how similar she was to everyone else of the refugees. So that was one part of it, like to do a kind of social history. A second kind of approach was and I'll just show you was to read her existing novels and use a lot of awful post-its. I'll take them out at some point, and do like literary criticism of her work. But that wasn't. I mean, that would have been fine. But I mean, the best thing that ever happened to me in the past 4 or 5 years was, that I got on a plane from Berlin to Manchester, and from Manchester took a train to Shropshire. And a gentleman named Tom Barker picked me up at the train station. He's Ilse Gross's son, Ilse Barker's son. And well, he opened obviously like her entire world to me because the the diaries, the unpublished short stories, the unpublished poems, unpublished novels, unpublished memoirs. I just remember the first night you picked me up, Tom's here, so he picked me up at the train station. He dropped me off at the pub because I think he had other plans for that evening, but he'd brought along an unpublished memoir and just gave me the printout of the memoir and said, well, here's something for you to do tonight. And so I read it in the pub, and I was like, that's exactly what, I mean, it was just this incredible insight into this writer's life. Yeah, so Tom's to blame.
Speaking of Tom, he's here with us, as I believe his own children. And it would be really great. You said you would be happy to talk a little bit about your experience of being Ilse's son and how she talked or not about her history to you.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me along to this discussion. I am indeed Ilse's son, and that's a big sort of topic, that's a big subject, but what should I say? I suppose I grew up not really knowing anything about her past. I grew up, and as far as I was aware, I was born in Sussex, and I grew up there, and I knew she was German. The Jewish part was very much non-existent. I mean, I think that also applied. I don't know whether it doesn't. I don't think it mentions it in the book, Christoph. But her upbringing in Bingen, although she was of a Jewish family, they weren't. They didn't practice their religion belief at all, and that continued. So when I was growing up in the UK, I was very much not aware of that part of her history. We had Christmas, everything was, I could detect no difference to the upbringing of all my peers in and around the area. So that was interesting. So that was very much sort of not part of what she brought to the UK. And she also sort of, I think to a large extent, left her German identity behind. She didn't teach me any German. She tried to teach me French, as did the school, very, very unsuccessfully, sadly. I wish they were more successful. But yeah, as far as I was concerned, in those early years, I didn't know anything.
That's really fascinating. It sounds like one version of a typical second generation story, if that's how you see yourself. Because I suppose as you were talking, the thing that sprang into my mind, and I don't want to ask anything that will upset you, obviously, but you were missing grandparents and an aunt.
Absolutely, yeah. But I suppose what you don't have, you don't miss, if you know what I mean. It just never occurred to me that these people should be there, because they weren't. And until I grew up and realized maybe there were a few, people that weren't around, I was unaware of that.
I understand, Christoph, from your book that you also spoke to Tom's children, and I was really struck by one of the comments that I think maybe your son mentioned, that Ilse had the most perfect English accent, and I felt that was really a striking thing. I wondered what you both thought about that self-presentation.
Me, from my point of view, yeah. Well, to me, it just seemed completely normal. Although I suppose growing up, I do think I just thought that was the way she was, and that I didn't really consider that until I don't know what age that she was German, and that this English accent was very much a second sort of language to her, and that it was remarkable how English she was. I'm sure you will have read the book, and well, clearly, and know the story about her being mistaken for the Queen in the butcher's shop, and she really was that English, and she really did look quite like the Queen. So yeah, it was just to me it was quite normal, her being English. So it was abnormal thinking of her as German.
That's really fascinating. And Christoph, I wondered what you think about that, because as you say in your book, she became a translator from German, yet it sounded from what Tom said and from what you write, that she was very reluctant to speak German. Other German-speaking people didn't get anywhere with her in that regard.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's quite typical, right, for a lot of refugees to but yeah, but it's amazing that she still translated from the German at some point. For instance, she translated the work of Leni Riefenstahl, and the irony of that is like and it's just incredible. So yeah, I mean, it's part of her self-definition as a writer as well, right? I mean, all of these stories are important because they're like family stories and personal stories. But as the novelist Kathrine Talbot, she was also definitely not German Jewish. So she created, like, just on the page in the novels, she created a persona that was you couldn't tell at all like what her background was, I think.
Would you say a little like Conrad?
Sort of, yeah. Just like hard to tell, like a generic English author. Just in the same way that you said her English didn't sound as if she was from any particular place, but that it was just like kind of generic English. Yeah.
In fact, I wondered what you both think about her novels. Christoph, you've got them there with your post-it notes. Tom, I'd be interested to know what your feelings were about that. Were you aware of them as you were growing up? And Christoph, do you think there's a chance for them to be retrieved, republished, brought back into the public realm in some way?
I was aware of them, and I found them very literary. You know, they're proper literature, aren't they? They're not really they're not. You shouldn't sit down and write a story. This is going to be a proper serious book. So I found them quite difficult to read, quite hard work to read when I was younger.
Yeah, I mean they're beautiful novels, and they're kind of Jamesian, like trying to do like Henry James novels in the 1950s and 1960s. So, and I mean, I very much enjoyed reading them. I also felt, but there was, I mean, but I also felt that there was a certain, I don't know, I don't want to put her down as a writer. Like she was a great novelist, but I also felt that there's one thing that like she created this persona as the English novelist Kathrine Talbot, no Jewish, no German background, and never ever in her novels do you see anything. Well, there's a couple of details, but you wouldn't like the Holocaust or trauma, survivor, guilt, whatever. Nothing appears in the novels. Nothing about that at all. And then at some point you think, because I also followed her later career, how she's trying to write, like she's kind of her career kind of goes downhill, and then the publishers won't accept her novels, and her agent doesn't really do anything for her, and you just wish at that point, why doesn't she just write about the stories that she knows, right? Write about the pain, like write about, I don't know, the Jewish community of Bingen, write about what happened to her parents, write about how her parents remained in Germany, that didn't leave Germany because they wanted to protect her special needs sister. Why didn't she write about that? Well, she couldn't, because Kathrine Talbot was not a Jewish novelist, right? And that was not her. So that was kind of. So I love the 3 published novels, but there was also kind of a tragedy in that she had the material and she couldn't really get it out. And there were a couple of reviewers at the time, also like in newspapers, who said, "Well, yeah, it's all very elegant, but there's no real, like, where's the real pain? It all sounds a bit artificial, a bit stilted." And it's like as if they kind of noticed that kind of the real story that she had to tell, she didn't tell. So, yeah.
I think you mentioned that Elizabeth Bishop also wished they were a bit more dramatic, which seemed really an interesting insight. But as you say about one of the novels, The Innermost Cage, there is a representation of something like survivor guilt. I don't know if you want to just, either you and Tom, maybe say something about that novel in particular.
I'll leave that to Christoph.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a story of survivor guilt, but she kind of transposes it to, I don't know, a young woman who's lost her parents on some float in the Pacific after a shipwreck or something, and it's a real. and it doesn't really make all that much sense. And you kind of notice that like she really wants to tell another story, that like the story about her parents who did not survive and the Holocaust, and she who did survive, and kind of, I'm not sure. I'm obviously reading this from my perspective, and so I'm hoping for things to happen in her novels that maybe back then in the 50s and 60s people didn't expect. But also what I wanted to follow through in the book is how she, at the very end of her writing career, she did finally come around to write about her experiences. So there's a really wonderful unpublished novel. It's called Please Open the Door, and it's and it talks about a Jewish German maid working for a horrible English couple. And it's all in there. It's like the parents, her Jewish parents, who are still in Germany. She's in London. The war begins. She's trying to adapt and can't really. She finds out she can't do to her hair what British women are doing to, like she doesn't have the language. She doesn't have the skill. Like it's really like a migrant story. Like how do I create like a new identity for myself? And that is a wonderful novel. And if you're asking about whether a novel should see the light of day today, you know, that would be wonderful to see that novel find an audience these days.
Is that a possibility, do you think? Is it a whole novel's length text?
There's some interest in like there's a German press, and they promised to read it. So that's all I can say. And it's not much of a like there's but that's you know, I'm hoping for them to read it and maybe think about the German translation, and maybe that's going to work out.
Just a final question about that before moving on to something else, which is that you mentioned that you consulted the Ilse Barker papers, and it sounds as if they're papers that, Tom, you have in your possession. Is that what they are? They're not kind of publicly available?
No, I think they're just the papers that are now in Berlin currently. just documents, yeah, just from my past and the history. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. It's like a chance confluence of both of you together have brought this all about.
Indeed.
Yeah. I think Monica mentioned your book was first published in Germany, and I think you yourself translated it into English. And my first question about that is, what did readers make of it there? Because obviously a British perspective on a refugee from Germany to Britain might be a bit different from a German perspective on that story.
True. Well, it wasn't a runaway success in Germany, and partly because well, there's just, I mean, that's just a cliche. I mean, it's completely banal to even point that out. But as with all the refugees fleeing Germany in the 1930s, and all the intellectuals, philosophers, writers, artists, scientists leaving Germany. So to look at an almost completely unknown British writer who didn't even talk about her emigre experience in her novels, that was a tough case to make on the book market, I guess. But it was fine. I was still like I'm really grateful to Tom that we're like the story is out there, like also in Germany, and that it's not just about Thomas Mann and Bertolt Brecht and Hannah Arendt, but that there is a story like that also deserves to be heard. In England, I'm not sure if you, I mean, yeah, what's interesting is being like the whole story of deportation, the Olive Man, and how she saw that. And but yeah, and I mean, you could think that like being deported to a camp innocently, that reminds you of, but I mean, there is no comparison, obviously, between the camps on the Olive Man and the German death camps, and she was very aware of that. You know, there was no way you could compare these experiences. She did have a grudge. She did bear a grudge against the people of Liverpool, though, because like she was passing through Liverpool on the way to the Olive Man, and people in Liverpool were throwing rocks at the buses with the refugees, and then And that was something I think till the end of her life. Maybe Tom knows more about that. I mean, Liverpool, she always had a thing against Liverpool. Isn't that right?
It is probably right. We did go with her when the Tate Liverpool was in its infancy, which whenever that was, I can't even remember when the Tate Liverpool opened. But yeah, she was not overly excited about going to Liverpool, but she did enjoy the experience and the Tate and all that. But yeah, not her favourite place.
And the strange thing is that in Bingen, the town where she's from, there's this mountain. The town is set against this mountain. And the name of the mountain is Klopp Mountain, so Klopp, like the savior of Liverpool. So yeah, but that's not, and it's not in the book. It's not relevant to the story.
Though I think you did say that she had a late encounter with some Liverpool football fans who were chopping, so that's something. Just following on from what you're both talking about, how do you think British readers, though we're to some extent accustomed to it, will respond to the less positive aspects of wartime memory? Because, as you know, it's mostly quite triumphalist in Britain, including the fact that refugees weren't always welcome, the exploitation of their domestic service, as you've mentioned as well, and the fact of internment that was really a great thing.
I'm not entirely sure. I mean, there's a lot of literature on that as well. So I guess like scholars would know about this. And I guess it would be important. I mean, for me, I'm just saying that as a German, that it would be important to see the nuances and to see how I don't know. Yes, they were deported to the Olive Man, and that must have been horrible. But also, there's a story by Ilse that she was using the novels from the library in the camp, and that English citizens donated books and novels to the camp library for the so if you're looking at that from a German perspective, it's just you can only hope that people realize how that might have been it was a big mistake by the government, but it wasn't a systematic atrocity. It wasn't a system of atrocities. So that's kind of my way of looking at it. But there's historians who know way more about this than I do. So
that's really interesting, because one of the first things, obviously, I read in your book is the very first sentence, and or the very first two sentences. And if it's all right, I thought I would just read them out. The first section is called Stones, and it says, "The maid is 19 years old. She dreams of being a poet. They deport her on a Monday morning. She's doing the laundry when the policeman arrives." And I hope that just very brief extract will give a flavour of the kind of work this is, but it's quite mysterious, because at that point, the vocabulary of the young maid who wants to be a poet, she's going to be deported on a Monday morning. That's the vocabulary that you don't associate with her life in Britain, which is where we discover that is actually taking place. So as you say, though, of course, there's a huge gulf between death camps and the internment camps. It's a bit of a shock to read about that, I think. Was that your plan?
Yeah, I guess I wanted that first chapter to just be confusing, because I think she was probably horribly confused. Like they had no idea what was going to happen to them, and I kind of wanted that like to feel like I wanted readers to feel a little bit like that like not even knowing like what country we're in, like yeah, just because it must have been so confusing. And again, I don't want to make light of the fact that this was like this must have been a horrible experience for her. Yeah, so I guess I wanted to express that in the first chapter.
I think that's exactly what you achieved. And the detail that really struck me is that it says she's hanging out the laundry, and apparently people thought that secret signals were being sent back to Germany with the laundry, which I had never heard, and I think is an indication of the kind of the layers of research that you must have done, produce the portrait.
Thank you, but there's really excellent scholarship on Jewish German refugees in England. So all I had to do was do interlibrary loan and read some books and journals.
And just Tom, to bring you back in, was there a lot of the material that Christoph gathered that was all new to you, or did Ilse start talking a bit more to you later in life?
I suppose because I'd read the writings that Christoph has referred. Oh, have I frozen?
We can
You can see me, can you?
we can hear you, but you're
Okay.
frozen, but that's fine.
I wonder why that's gone. There we go. Maybe that's better. Sorry, what was the question? Was I aware?
Was a lot of the material that Christoph has gathered and written new to you, or did Ilse start talking a bit more about it?
I think most of it was I was aware of. I was not aware, however, most importantly, that I was it the third best singer in the school? This detail was news to me. But apart from that, it was I was aware of most of it because I'd read the material that Christoph used to such effect in writing the books. So in general, no, I was aware of it.
I mean, the most important, and what's most important to the book as in terms of material were the letters, right? She was an obsessive letter writer, and that really emerged from her experience leaving Germany at 14 because she couldn't stand the anti-Semitism in her school. And she wrote a letter to her parents every day, and she got a letter from her parents every day. And I think that kind of obsessive letter writing that just informed her, like her entire life, right? And led to that exchange with Elizabeth Bishop over decades, but also you guys, right? Tom, I mean, you and your mother, you exchanged letters, and that was wonderful. Like you sent me that big box with all the papers. And I think that at some point you sent something else and you were like, oh, I found the letters. And the letters were really extremely important because she used them as a kind of diary and so many details about her life are surfaced in the letters. So
yeah, she started every day. Every day and at home by sitting down and writing probably for a couple of hours to her correspondence. Definitely. So and me being one of those, loads of letters, and fortunately we had kept a lot of them. So yeah.
I was going to say a lesson to keep everything. But actually, Christoph, I wondered if you wanted to say something about the correspondence with Elizabeth Bishop, because I suppose people are used to hearing about Elizabeth Bishop's correspondence, but this is like the other side of those letters. And what was it, do you think, that formed such a close bond between them? Because it sounds as if the Barker's correspondence was quite unusual.
Yeah, it's the letters are amazing, like because they're letters between, like, Bishop was this really major poet at the time. Like, she won a Pulitzer Prize and she lived in Brazil, and she was her partner was one of the most famous architects of Brazil, and the Barkers weren't particularly successful at that point. So it's like, why did these people exchange letters? But they had this same kind of a very similar, like, precise view of the world. I think were really attentive to the details of everyday life, and Bishop turned that into poetry, and Ilse turned that into her novels. But the letters are about everything, like about writing, coffee. It was interesting that Elizabeth Bishop also wrote a lot about football, like she was a real fan. It was about food and like everyday details, but also like the books they'd read, the poems they loved. And those are, and so you keep reading them, and then at some point, and that to me was the most important part, it was really like when in this exchange of letters, they exchanged letters for years and years, but suddenly there comes a point when Ilse must have told Bishop about the fate of her parents and her sister in the Holocaust. You go, like, after like 15 years of writing letters every week, now the story's coming out, and yeah, and that's really that was really a moment that was like, it was just amazing. That, I mean, not just because like Bishop responded in a kind of in a kind of wonderfully moving way, but also just because you think about like why was she keeping that a secret? I mean, you can explain it, of course, like if you know like the scholarship of the Holocaust and trauma and how people, you know, just can't talk about it. You know, I know that is that's the way it is, and because of, you know, that's what all scholars say. But if you see it in this exchange of letters between these two women, then you just learn about it in a completely new way. Yeah, about how silence just informs everything around the Holocaust, and even for the survivors as well.
Well, as you say, I was really struck by what you said about Elizabeth Bishop's response, that she said she and her partner stayed up all night talking, and then they wanted the Barkers to come to Brazil, which seemed very touching, though I understand that never happened.
No. Or did it? No, they never went to Brazil. No.
Though they'd had all those formative times in the USA. So they were kind of transnational figures. Just thinking a little bit more, you mentioned the parents, and obviously in your book you have some photographs. Some of the most touching are the two that you show of Ilse as a child with her father, and one with her mother. I don't know if there's any point holding them up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the one, she's leaning on her father's back, and he looks quite formally dressed, but they're obviously very at ease with each other. And the one with her mother in Geneva, I think maybe that was the last time they saw each other, where they're just touching hands.
Yeah.
Right. And I wondered, Tom, as well, are these the only photographs of the parents in the earlier generation that exist, or did you choose from a source of several?
No, they're not the only ones that exist at all. There are a number. These were, I don't know, how many are there? Maybe 20, 30. So that no, they weren't my choice for the book. But they're lovely. What I don't know whether it's relevant to show you. I don't think in the book the wine label is spoken about and written about, but I just got that to hold up to show you that, which I think is. Can you see that?
Just about. Do you want to say something about it?
Well, as I think Christoph recounts the story in the book, that when myself and my family went out to Bingen in 2007, we were standing outside for the Stumbling Stones, the dedication for the memorials to those that perished in the Holocaust, outside the houses where they had lived, although the house no longer existed, it had been replaced. But anyway, there was the building, and there were the stones, and we were going through the ceremony, and it was all quite solemn. And then a lady came out of the house opposite and said, "Excuse me, who, if anyone here is a relative of the Gross family?" And I said it was me, and she came over and said, "I picked this off the street when the house was bombed, and it's the only surviving label from the winery, so it is Gross wine." And she gave it to me, and there we are. And so that's a treasured possession.
It's extraordinary. Had she been just saving it in case somebody from the family returned, do you think?
That was exactly it. She'd saved it for decades in case somebody turned up.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, but lovely. That made me very happy. I don't know whether that's relevant at all. I can't really remember the question.
It was about the family photographs and illustrations.
Yeah.
Christoph, you do talk about the winemaking, which still flourishes in Bingen, as I understand.
It does, yeah. I mean, that's kind of it's just part of the story that she's from this incredibly German town that's on the Rhine, the great river of Germany, and it's this wine town where for centuries Germans have gone to get drunk on wine. And there was well, in her family were wine merchants, right, in business since 150 years before 1933. No, 100 years before, right, since 1835. So it's just I mean it's kind of I mean, if it weren't so tragic. It's almost, there's something really fun about the story about like all these little wine merchants. I mean, we were in Bingen and we toured a wine merchant's basement, and everything smells like wine, and it's really like it's a wonderful kind of little wine town. So if you're ever on the Rhine, go to Bingen. But I mean, it's also, I mean, the story is also that they had this vibrant Jewish community. Many wine merchants were Jewish, and that all this deteriorated after 1933, and just a matter of years, and that the traditional Gross und Söhne wine company, they celebrated in 1935. I think they celebrated the 100th anniversary, and then they closed down about a year later. And yeah, that's the end of that story.
The woman handing over the wine label is even more significant, it seems, in the light of that. Sure. And that brings me to what might be my last question before we open up for other people to ask questions, which is, do you think ultimately, I know this is really a big and also vague question, was Ilse able to reconcile the Kathrine Talbot British persona with her German Jewish past? Maybe that's a question for both of you from your perspectives.
I'll let Christoph kick off with that one.
Well, as I said earlier, I think as a writer, it wasn't really possible because she created this persona that wasn't a refugee writer. Like the protagonists of her novels had the issues they had were like they weren't successful as poets, or they were unhappily in love, or those were the issues they had, and there was nothing about the Jewish German experience. So yeah, I don't really think she managed to reconcile it. But again, like later, very late in her life, when she started writing more about her own experiences, then she did. But it just, nobody noticed because the novels and the memoirs weren't published.
I think you said in your question, was she able to? And yeah. I don't think she even wanted to. So I think the question is the wrong question, because I think she wanted to keep them separate, and she did succeed in keeping them separate. She had this person here, and she had this person here, and a third person here, which was just so she compartmentalized life, and that bit she put to one side and said, that was really bad, but I'm going to put that to one side, and I'm going to move on to this really good part, and I'm going to make the most of it and thrive and survive, and she did.
I suppose that it makes me wonder, if the unpublished novel were to be published, what name would it be published under?
Good question. We'll sort that out when we get there.
Just a final thing is that it's interesting that the Kathrine Talbot is missing the E of Catherine. In a way, that seems like a sign of something odd, or is that reading too much into it? When you do a search online, it corrects it automatically, obviously, to Catherine.
I vaguely remember my parents talking about this, vaguely, because my memory is a little bit fuzzy sometimes, but it was something to do with, they had a discussion, they sat down and they said, well, what are we going to call you, or what am I going to call myself? And I think it was, no, not the Catherine, it was the Talbot. The Talbot bit was about cars, because the Talbot car factory was in, I don't know why it's irrelevant, it was Birmingham way, but that is irrelevant. But my father was always sort of into his cars, interested in cars, and they may well have had a Talbot, and Talbot seemed a very English make, and therefore a very English suitable author's name. But that doesn't answer the question about the E in Catherine. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, that's really fascinating. Maybe we should allow others to ask questions. I've definitely had my fair share. Is it the case that, Monica, you are gathering questions? There's Jonathan has a question and or a comment. Jonathan, is he allowed to unmute himself and speak, perhaps? Can you speak? No. Can Jonathan be unmuted somehow?
Could I?
You're the host.
Hold on. I didn't realize it was up to. Is that? Wait, is there anything I could do?
He can unmute himself on the computer.
No.
Oh, I'm fine.
Go ahead.
I have a voice. Just said, I thought it was really amazing. I mean, I work in Elizabeth Bishop, so I've known how important Ilse and Kit were important to Bishop. I think they were probably, you know, more important as correspondents than people who are more famous.
Jonathan, you've frozen. Oh, you're back. Perhaps.
Based on the postcards at Vassar, I think Bishop's letters and postcards to Kit and Ilse are actually at Princeton, so we didn't get to look at those. But one of the things Bishop sent her friends was this wonderful invitation card. I don't know if you can see it. So it was an art exhibition by your father, Tom. But at least the beginning of the message talks about Kit and Ilse. So she was writing to her friend Lauren McIver, who was a painter whose paintings are at MoMA in New York, and she said, she said, it'll be awfully kind of you to go. As I said, I think they'll be there the 26th and 27th, so both Kit and Ilse. You can't miss them, I'm sure, both fairly small. He has blue eyes and spectacles. She has beautiful light brown eyes and very black hair. She speaks and writes better English than I do. I like them both more than any people I've met in years. I just thought it'd be a nice thing to share with you. So that's 1950. Bishop had only, I think, met them a year or two before. So already after a couple of years, she was already describing her to her friends as, you know, some of the best, you know, her closest friends. And obviously they continued corresponding the rest of her life. I think also, Kit, your father, Tom, created a painting that accompanied a poem that she wrote for Robert Lowell as well. So both of them, I think, were equally important to her. So I just thought it'd be a nice thing to share. I did have a question. I suppose, does Ilse talk about Bishop at all in the memoir? I was just intrigued if there's sort of any more about Elizabeth Bishop there.
In the memoir, there's not much. No, it's really mostly the letters, if I remember correctly. Yeah, wonderful postcard though. That's a great find.
It's somehow very touching that they seem to have that natural affinity. And I think, Christoph, you kind of suggest that some of the other correspondence that Bishop had, she just didn't feel that way about, but also they were more judgmental about her unconventional life, perhaps. Ilse and Kit.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. She always described Kit and Ilse as just very open to whatever she wrote. There was like, yeah, non-judgmental. Absolutely.
That's extremely heartening to hear, you see. I think what you've just been talking about shows that we haven't really talked much about Kit's painting, but I know that your focus is really on Ilse, not on Kit, but that's a whole other story, perhaps.
Yeah, I think like writing a biography. I mean, I should also point out that she didn't particularly enjoy biographies. So, so writing a biography. I mean, obviously you do emphasize some things and some things you downplay. And I guess if like I think if she were here to read this, she'd probably ask like, "Where's the stuff about Kit's paintings?" I'm very sure because that was very important to her. But it's just I just wanted to highlight her creative career, and so yeah, that. There
Yes,
was
well,
no way around it, because also it was important to me too. I mean, it was a wonderful marriage, it seems like, but also, you know, her career stalled because of this guy here, Tom, and because, you know, she was a mother first, a housewife first, and her novels just after that, you know, her career, and that was so her career basically in public, like she didn't publish any novels after that. And I don't think that's an accident. Like if you read her letters and if you read her memoirs, I mean, that was, you know, so it's not just, I did want to also make that a part of the story and not just pretend that that wasn't there, but also to look at her as a woman author in the 1960s and 70s, which was, which just was, it was just significant because her career did end, like in terms of just looking at published novels in the early 1960s.
You also say, I think in the book, you say in the book that she was, I can't remember the term you used, surprised or whatever, that the most successful piece that she wrote, that she got feedback on, was the piece she wrote about their time in Cornwall. Whatever it was called, what was the title? It had Kit in the title, didn't it?
Yeah, it was basically a book about him and his painting in Cornwall. So, and not so much about her, even though she was also writing in Cornwall. So, but it was always like that was always on the back burner, and it seemed always like Kit's painting was more important.
Yeah,
but that was her choice. Yeah.
Well, it was about their life there together, and the life of all those other creative types that were in Cornwall at that time.
it seems amazing that they seemed to fall into those kind of creative milieu. Maybe not by accident, just meeting people in London and New York and Cornwall. It was all a fortunate, seemingly preordained career.
Yeah, I think they must be lucky, don't know. Yeah, they both, I think they had a good life, you know, in the end.
Yes. Well, that's very touching to hear that. I don't want to stop anybody else asking any question that they may have.
So yes, I'm looking at the time and thinking maybe indeed we should now rope in anybody else who'd like to contribute to the discussion. Now is your chance. I have all sorts of things I'd like to ask or comment on, but let's see if anybody else would like to say anything first. And I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I noticed various other people with the name Barker as, you know, members of the next generation, this sort of so-called third generation. I don't know, Tom, I mean, forgive me for asking, but, you know, is that sort of concept of being a second generation member something that's familiar to you? Is that a term that you are aware of at all?
No.
No, I had a feeling you might say that. I mean, this is something that's, you know, been an increasing preoccupation both for myself and I think for insiders outsiders generally. It's the way that the next generation, those who did not live through the parents or indeed grandparents' history directly, know how you grapple with that difficult history. And there is this sort of phenomenon, the second and then indeed in turn the third generation. So Louis, for example, but as I say, don't want to put you on the spot, you know, how you know, to what extent you wish to engage, you have managed to engage with those troubled histories, or, you know, I'd be very interested, and I think your daughter is also here, but as I say, I don't want to force anybody to say anything.
No, I think it's an interesting point, as Christoph mentions in the book. You know, my strongest and fondest memories of her are someone who was just my grandma, you know, and someone who wasn't, you know, there wasn't this figure who would then have a book written about her. It was just someone who was very, you know, warm, touching, and looking out for me as a grandchild. So yeah, it's almost like learning about a whole new person in my life, and also, you know, something a difficult subject. So to learn about that subject matter that relates to your own family is quite difficult, and it's almost like, yeah, I'm learning about a new person, and someone who almost doesn't feel like the same grandma, if that makes sense.
It's I think necessary, but as you say, it's complicated, isn't it? Extremely complicated, sort of.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Tom, you mentioned that you know, you were familiar with the letters, with the written material that you gave Christoph access to, but at what point did you become aware? You said as a child growing up, you never questioned the absence of grandparents, for example, had no sense of your mother not being anything else than English. At what point did that change? I mean, can you pinpoint it at all? Was that hard?
I wouldn't say I could pinpoint
No.
it. It was just a gradual process, you know, little by little, and gradual. Apart from the moment when I found out that Ilse had been married before, which was 20 years ago, which was not gradual or anything. It was just like, oh, how interesting, because she explained, as Christoph says in the book, I think, that when we moved to Clun, she said, oh, how wonderful, you'll be near Julian. And I said, who's Julian? And she said, oh, he's the son of my first husband. Which first husband? So yeah, in that particular moment, it wasn't gradual. But apart from that, yeah, it was a very sort of slow process through maybe between the years when I was 10 and 20-ish.
And I'm naturally intrigued. I mean, this mention of an hitherto unpublished text, which does uniquely, you know, sort of engage directly with her own personal story. Please open the door. One publisher, I think you should try, by the way, Christoph. I don't know if you've come across the Persephone Press. You know, they are interested. I mean, there's the gender aspect. You know, they're all very keen on resuscitating the reputation of once well-known and quite successful women writers. And, you know, I think they would definitely, I can give you an introduction to Nicola Bowman, who I think is still at the helm there. They moved to Bath recently from London, but they do wonderful publications. Yes, it sounds as though it would be well worth it seeing the light of day. Yeah. How did she feel about it? I mean, Tom, going back to you, did she express a wish for it to be published?
Absolutely. Yes, she wanted everything she wrote to be published. She tried. I do remember throughout all those letters for all those years, she was saying, I've sent off my book to X, Y, and Z, and they've all rejected it, and I shall try again next week.
Okay, because in some cases, you know, people write memoirs only for the family, but this is obviously a different phenomenon. Very interesting. Anybody else would like to ask anything? No? I was just sort of thinking sideways slightly, Christoph. It struck me as you were talking, and I haven't yet had a chance to read any of her novels, and I would love, you know, maybe you can say, actually, perhaps before I go on, to say something about how best to get hold of them. I mean, online, you do a search, you find one or two, but it's not that easy, is it?
No, it's not. I have my copies and I'm not giving them away.
Yes, indeed. No, because one thing that struck me, and I'm speaking slightly hesitantly because I haven't read the books, but from what you've said about the Jamesian quality, the kind of sense of almost, am I right, sort of clipped understatement? Is that perhaps not quite the right way of putting it, but have I perhaps got that sort of right?
Yeah.
But and also that kind of not evasiveness, but simply not engaging directly with family histories. It reminds me slightly of Anita Bruckner. And I just wonder if you're familiar with her work and whether there might be some sort of quite interesting comparative study to be made there.
I'm a big fan, big fan of.
Do they have something in common, in fact?
Yeah, she's awesome. But it's different. It's because how does that compare? And think Bruckner is closer to like just British everyday life, whereas Kathrine Talbot was really created a kind of like upper class cosmopolitan world, and that's just different. But you're right, and actually that was something that I was thinking about. There was like 2 years ago, like October, November, I read like 5 Anita Bruckner novels in a row, and I was like, yeah, she could have done that, but well, she didn't. She was Kathrine Talbot, so yeah.
That could be a tagline, though, from what you're saying: the new Anita Bruckner, or like Anita Bruckner.
Sort of, yeah.
I mean, Sue, this phenomenon of a kind of, I have it in my own family history. There was one person who I won't mention by name, but who absolutely suppressed any hint of his German Jewish origins, became the pucker British gentleman in his case. I mean, it's not an unfamiliar phenomenon in that search to protect yourself from the past and indeed to protect the next generations. I mean, let's face it, Tom, I don't know if that's something that you felt consciously or unconsciously at the time, that there was, you know, that urge to protect you from that dreadful knowledge of what happened.
I would say I didn't feel it at the time because I was unaware of it, but I would say yes, that would be correct. I think she just wanted to put that behind her and move on, and to not burden me with this history. Certainly until I was whatever, 20-ish.
I think I'm right, Sue. I don't. This is not an uncommon.
No, you are right.
Yeah, and it's totally understandable. Yeah.
Sure.
Though just thinking of Anita Bruckner, she does have some characters who are kinder transport survivors.
You're right. There are perhaps more hints, aren't there? They're more. Yeah.
They're not always.
But it's very understated, isn't it? It's yes, yeah, interesting. Christoph, by way of conclusion, could I perhaps ask you to read just a little, a short passage from one of her own? I mean, actually, one thing perhaps, and I don't know if anybody noticed, my internet connection played up horribly for a few nasty minutes, so I lost complete track of you. I was literally cut out for a few minutes, so forgive me if this was indeed mentioned. But your writing style is wonderful, and it's not a conventional biography by any means, and you play around with chronology as well as narrative styles. Is it in any way, in fact, influenced the way you wrote your book? Is it in some measure influenced by the way she wrote?
Yeah, I wasn't trying to emulate her, but well, yeah, but obviously, it's, to write about a writer who left behind so many letters and memoirs. I mean, that's like a gold mine, right? Like you can't go wrong. I just writing this, I just told myself basically, don't mess this up. You're never going to get a wealth of material that even compares to this. So that was really my only kind of. I just wanted to land this plane safely, and not be guilty of messing that up. Do you want me to read from her work or from mine?
What do you think, Sue? I mean, I just think again, I'm very much aware most people won't actually have read anything by this writer. Would you mind? I mean, I think it just might be a rather nice way to conclude.
So from her.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but
again, I have a zillion post-its here. Oh yeah, I mean, there's her first novel is really it's an incredible novel about like bohemians and there's this poet, a young woman, and her brother is also a poet. And he's so much better and so much more charismatic. And so what he does is all the men that are first interested in her then turn to her brother, and then she's left alone. And it's a wonderful story. And it ends, and then all these. And then all these, it's really like it's a great story of she's alone in a house, like an artist colony, and all these men who are spending time with her charismatic brother instead of spending time with her, they're out on a hiking trip. And so what she does to the artist colony is she sets it on fire. And and then you read, then they were running. So all these men who rather hang out with each other than with her, then they were running round the lake toward the house, which was crumbling, burning invisibly against the strong sun. Yeah, it's not much, but it's just a wonderful ending. I've never read a novel that even that talks about an artist colony where an unhappy young woman just sets it on fire. It's a really radical move. so that I really
published her work, by the way. Was it one particular publisher who?
Yeah, that was Putnam, which was a really important New York publishing house, and then then Faber and Faber. So she was really a mainstream author, if only for a decade or so. But
And how do you think you might account for the, her fall from fame, as you might put it? I mean,
well,
is
I
it
think
partly
it's
a
care work.
stylistic?
I mean, it is that her role in the family. She was she supported, she managed, she motivated Kit Barker to paint more paintings, sell more paintings, etc. Then there was Tom Barker, and not to put you on a guilt trip or anything, but also there's also like I think there's also an aesthetic reason that like in the mid 60s, I think her style just seemed a bit conservative. Like it was Jamesian, and that was great, but I think in the mid 60s it just felt a bit maybe out of date, bit old fashioned, and that was a time maybe when she, I mean, she could have, but she didn't want to, right? And like she just didn't want to make that radical move to just focus on the story of her family's experience. That she did not do, but and so that was mainly the reason why her career faded away.
So it is a bit of an irony, Christoph, that, as you said, the drama in that novel is really quite extreme, even though one of the criticisms made of her work is that it wasn't dramatic enough. Actually, there's drama in it.
Right.
But
There was drama, right, at the very end. Yeah.
All right, no questions. I'm surprised, but let's perhaps leave it at that. I mean, apropos the question of internment, which is of a particular interest of mine, I have to say. I mean, I think, in the last few years, yes, more has been written, more has been discovered about that whole very morally murky episode in British wartime history. But I would say perhaps among a broader public, there's a great deal of ignorance still. And going back, Sue, I think to what you were saying, that actually we tend to have this triumphalist, rather rosy-tinted vision of British, stoicism and heroism in wartime. It's not the whole story, and certainly one of the kind of subtexts, if you like, of the whole Insiders Outsiders project is to actually open a wider number of people's eyes to the very mixed reception and experiences that so many of the refugees actually had. And of course, internment is one very notable example of that. And just to mention, for those of you who are not familiar with the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel, and incidentally, this has been recorded and the recording will be posted on there very shortly. If you go to insidersoutsiders.festival.org, you'll see more about the festival as a whole and its afterlife, but also there's a link from that to the YouTube channel. But we do actually have a whole series of talks that go back now several years on different aspects of internment, particularly creativity in internment, because one of the ironies, and again, irony of ironies, perhaps you talked about how they, the Isle of Man camps were very different, obviously, to the death camps in Nazi Europe. And yet, one of the linking factors is that actually against all the odds in both circumstances, even though one was so much more extreme and dark than the other, creativity flourished. And I think, this is a really interesting topic in itself, and it's something that, some of our events have engaged with. So do take a look. And right. Also, last but not least, there is a discount available. I hope you will all, Marjorie, are you wanting to say something?
Yes,
please do.
It's worth mentioning that if there's any information whatsoever on women in internment, I think whatever you have is always worthwhile putting forward, because we certainly, what I've come across is a lot about the men in internment and their work, and some about women. But I think the more we have, the better. So I think that's, if there's anything there that you have, Tom or Christoph, bring it forward, because it's very helpful.
No, I agree. A lot of people don't even realize that women were interned in the south of the island. And yes, in fact, in your book, you mentioned Margareta Klopfleisch, who's an interesting character. I met her daughter, actually, and granddaughter not so very long ago. Ruth Borchardd's another very interesting woman who became an important collector of self-portraits by British artists, who wrote about her imprisonment in, I think it was Holloway prison, prior to being taken off. So yes, it's a tricky but important subject to bring out into the open as much as possible. So did you want to say anything else at all?
I just wanted to recommend Christoph's book again, which is really gripping to read. And as this discussion has shown, it's really enlightening and fascinating, a little facet of British history, a new author to think about. And it would be really great to hear some news potentially about republication.
or publication of that unpublished text. I'd be very keen to know more. So we'll keep in touch, I hope, Christoph, about that. But let me just tell you how to get a discount, a 20% discount on what is already actually a very reasonably priced volume. I think it's £19.95, isn't it, full price? But the publisher, Valentine Mitchell, have kindly agreed to offer everybody signed up for this event a 20% discount on that. And the code is just Ribbat, it's Christoph's surname, 24. And if you go to the Valentine Mitchell website, which is www.vm for Valentine mitchellbooks.com, you will get access, you'll be able to order it online. So lovely. Thank you very much, all of you, Christoph above all, but actually it's a real delight and a surprise, Tom, to have you with us and to see you talking so frankly and personally about you in relation to your mother. And Sue, thank you very much for being the the mediator of all this, and thank everybody for attending. And if you wish to sign up to our newsletter, incidentally, if you go to that insidersoutsiders.org website and you scroll down to the very bottom right of the homepage, you can sign up in 2 seconds flat to be kept informed of subsequent events as well. Good. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Fascinating.